back to InfoWars, and I'm standing in this fourth hour on Friday, March 8th, 2019. And man, what a last few weeks this has been. I know it's been a little while. Had to juggle my dates around. I was traveling, actually. I was in Thailand and stops in China, Hong Kong, and man, what a difference in things. When you think about Asia, you hear a lot about Asia, but going there and seeing Asia is a little bit different, and I can tell you, Shanghai and Hong Kong airports, unreal, in terms of size. And some of my encounters there, because I just transited airports in China. China is not really my place to go. But I was visiting my business partner and attending a wedding in Thailand, which was pretty interesting. And the gold culture of Asia, you forget about it when you're not there for a while, but, some background a little bit about Asia, what's going on in the world. And it makes me really focus on this a bit today. When you think about what's happening in the West, whether it be Asia growing on one side, and then you look at the West, Europe, Canada, the United States, and you think about it just in raw terms. Population, the U.S., but 350, 400 million, including Canada, maybe another 100 million. You look at Europe, and you're adding in maybe 400 million more. And these are mature economies. The middle class has reached sort of its optimum levels. Money's more and more concentrated in the top 1% or half of 1%. And now that money is being shifted because what has happened is the creation of institutions with the name democratic, when in fact they're not democratic at all. And I'm speaking of the European Parliament as a case in point. No one is elected to the European Parliament, and yet they consider themselves a democratic body because they all vote. The parliamentarians vote for issues that then regulate the lives of people who never voted for them. And fundamentally, going back to our very beginnings as Americans, we need to recognize that this is where our country started, was government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Governance and the authority to govern springing from us, sovereign souls, sovereign human beings. And this is what Europe has forgotten. So they name institutions where there's nobody elected. They're all appointed. A few now are being elected, I guess, in Great Britain, but they're about out of there. So when you think about this body of people regulating people's lives on a pretty significant basis, and having no authority from the people to do so. This is socialism. This is something else. This is not democracy or the representation of a republic or even the idea of Republican democracies or those that spring from people. When I was thinking about China and I was thinking about Asia, it's sort of how their system runs. There's 4 billion with a B, 4 billion people that are going to move into the middle class probably over the next 30 to 40 years. When you think about where Asia is, look at Asia at 4.4 billion, Africa 1.2 billion, and then compared to Europe and North America combined 1.2 billion. So the real energy is Asia, or where that middle class is growing. And let's look at a couple of countries in particular. China and India. China has become the #1 producer of gold in the world. A lot of people don't realize it. I believe that now Russia has become #2, and #3 is South Africa. And you got to remember, these are groups that are part of the BRIC, which is sort of the alternative emerging economic powerhouse. This includes Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa, the big five of that group. Now, what's important to note here is these are also net importers of gold. India, as a case in point, for the last couple of centuries, was buying 25% of all the gold output, and most of that going into private hands. But this is a tradition across Asia. People hold gold and buy gold and bank in gold. Look at this little piece. I picked up this little chain in Thailand when I was there, and it's 96.5% gold. And you pay pretty close to the gold price for it. You don't pay very much for the workmanship of any of the jewelry you buy in these parts of the world, because you're buying the gold, basically, and labor's cheap, so they apply it. But they use it like banking. And everybody from the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich put their money in gold. Certain amount in currency, but those are unstable from their perspectives. And remember, the Chinese invented currency, in terms of paper money, long before the West. And then, of course, Sumeria had the clay tablets for money 6,000, 7,000 years ago. But again, the trade-off between BAT, which is what was shown in the last image, and the gold in the case is pretty thin. So people hold gold as a way to preserve wealth. And then you think about, again, this emerging middle class of 4 billion people that are basically gold holders. Now, just think about this. China, Russia, and the Pacific created the Asian Pacific Bank to be the counter to the World Bank, right? Which the World Bank is kind of an extortion organization for rich people and globalists, because what they do is they put countries into debt where they become then indentured servitude citizens who then have their taxes messed around with by the World Bank and other external globalists. So they extract from those countries the tax yield, which is essentially the slavery of that population, to accommodate the World Bank. Now there's the Asian Pacific Bank. And what's important about that is a lot of our European allies have joined, and they've joined because they recognize that's where the market actually is. When you think about mature markets like payrolls in Asia are jumping from $100 a month to $500 a month to $1,000 a month to $2,000 or $3,000 a month, which starts to get into what we call middle class and they call upper middle class. Okay, but that's happening at a really rapid rate. Now think of the consumption involved in that: houses, cars, education, healthcare, different foods, all of it, imports, all the things that then come into play when you have more money to spend. And so when the big globalists look at this, they think of what is the percentage of growth when you go for $100 payrolls to several $1,000 payrolls. There's the growth. In the West, you go from $3,000 or $4,000 payrolls to maybe $3,400, $3,300 payrolls. So the growth is in the East, population is in the East, and we're being gutted in the West by the globalists. We're going to get into this a little bit more today. We're going to talk more about the propaganda wars, because we're all being manipulated in a way that is stripping us of our sovereignty. This is Dr. Nick Begich. You're listening to InfoWars. Take a look at Earth Pulse, EARTH, earthpulse.com. We'll be right back after these brief messages. And welcome back to InfoWars on March 8th, 2019. Man, the year is kind of whipping by, and I'm here in Anchorage today, and I've been traveling a bit. I was mentioning last segment my trip to Asia, what it made me really start to think about, contemplate in the context of all the things that we discuss here at InfoWars. And where I left off in the last segment was sort of why the West is declining and what sort of happened there. What did the globalists do? Well, after 2008, if you think about the big bailouts, most of these companies relocated. They relocated major facilities using that money, essentially, that bailed them out, to move, to leave. We spent $2 trillion out of the Federal Reserve buying up stocks, supporting the stock market, bailing out banks, and then $16 trillion in total out of the Federal Reserve, bolstering foreign banks. Now, the foreign banks were receiving zero interest loans from the Fed. This did not get disclosed until much, much later. And what that money was used for was buying up the dollars as the dollar was plummeting. They then had these zero interest loans from the Fed to jack it back up so foreign banks could keep an equilibrium on the dollar as we went into more or less a free fall. So 16 trillion actually got loaned out by the Federal Reserve, not the 2 trillion that we're told about relative to banks. Now, I want to talk about that in the context of something else, in the whole tax configuration. And why is YouTube, Google, Twitter, Facebook, all of these companies going against free speech and pushing on anyone that's been supportive of a yellow vest or a more to the right agenda? And the reason is these companies, their biggest portion of their wealth, including Starbucks and Amazon, their biggest portion of wealth is in the intellectual property piece that controls all of their affairs. And so what they do is they put that in a country like Ireland, where there's a 5% corporate tax. And so the intellectual property is there, and then they lease it or rent it or do it on a royalty basis with their American subsidiaries. So your net profit, say they make $1 billion. Well, it just so happens the leasing fees for the intellectual property was $1 billion that year. So zero profit in the U.S., all the profit in Ireland, and Ireland has a secretary sitting in a closet answering the phone, right? And this cost center makes $1 billion, pays 5% for Ireland. Ireland doesn't have any infrastructure to manage that little office and phone booth, but that's how it's done. Now, what Trump did in the Tax Reform Act is tax at 15%, at least something, all of this foreign income to repatriate it. So they can pay the Irish tax. They're also paying it here for the first time. Now, you and I as individuals were taxed on our global income forever. In fact, we couldn't just move like corporations could, just move. You don't need anybody's permission, set up a new company and escape the taxes. Trump brought it back. This is why these companies, the billionaires of the 21st century, are so angry. They actually have to pay. You know, these are the socialists thinking everything ought to be free as long as it's free for them, right? And here they are beating up Alex because we bring these kinds of issues to the forefront in an articulated way where you can look it up, find out and confirm the facts for yourself. And it's the counter narrative to the BS. And it's not fertilizer for the brain, ladies and gentlemen. It is what it is. And it is a dangerous thing in the world today, the way it is shaped and shifted. Now, when you think about the trillions spent, let's think of involuntary servitude for a moment. Do you know that the whole next generation that are college students going to school and paying, you know, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for those degrees, they are not going to be buying houses, and they're not. They're not buying cars, and they're not. They're not buying anything because they're trapped in that debt cycle. And this debt cycle, unlike anything else under the sun except hurting someone, physical harm, and child support, student debt, you never get forgiven. So you're always going to get those loans because you were enslaved forever. It is involuntary servitude because you do not have any escape route from that debt. Now, if the government, instead of spending $2 trillion on the bank bailout, if they had spent $1 trillion paying off all those student loans, as an example, I'm not suggesting we do this necessarily, but think about it. What would have happened? $1 trillion in debt would have gone away for people that actually would have spent the money in the economy here, buying those houses and cars and generating economic activity. It would have been tremendous. What the banks did is buy up their own shares when they were depressed so they could keep the share price up for their shareholders and didn't loan money out to stimulate the economy. That money came from the domestic corporations whose tax rates went from 35% down to 20%, the ones who produce things here and build things here and pay for things here and hire labor here in the United States. And guess what? They got to give raises to people, spend more money on physical plant. And you see it in our booming economy and low unemployment because Donald Trump was correct in taxing foreign corporations. Didn't go far enough because we need to address student loans. We need to address the enslavement of a generation, for goodness sake. They're so busy paying those debts off, they're not contributing to the economy as our economy is being stripped out and moved east. And this is the important thing. An enslaved younger generation will allow this to happen more readily because of the fear, the anxiety of that debt haunting them every day. This is what we've done, and this is what has happened. When you look at the changes in the bankruptcy code, those are up on the boards. The big ones that took place was 1990, where non-dischargeable period extended to 7 years, so you never really got a free break from your debt and a chance to restart. Corporations don't have the same rule. They have a different set of rules. They always win, and the little guy is on the losing end. So the pivot to the east that Obama was talking about was really, you know, and he was a guy that liked to lead from behind. I mean, I never could understand this nonsense. But the pivot to the east is the gutting of America, and that is what we have seen. What Donald Trump is pivot back to the west and stopped at our doorstep for a change. He's got NATO to pay part of their defense bill. He's getting a lot of different play in the United States. But what has happened here is a change that is the most fundamental, biggest change we've seen in our economy in quite some time. Bringing our military defense spending back into the U.S., because we can be anywhere in a few hours. We do not need to have bases in Europe. And the bases we have in Asia include Guam, which is our own territory. We own it. The Marshall Islands, which is our own territory. Going into the Pacific, we have the Virgin Islands reaching out and Puerto Rico reaching out. In Alaska, we can be anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere in 12 hours. We have major military installations here. This is the 21st century. Bring those bases back, spend that money at home, and let Europeans have those bases, but let them pay for them for a change. We've been paying 67%. That's according to Foreign Affairs, the Globalist Journal. 67%, and more than that for over 70 years. Donald Trump is correct. It's time to pull that money back into our economy, pivot to the West, bring it back home, and build the country that we all can appreciate, the country that the ideals that this nation was founded on. We're headed into the break. You're listening to Dr. Nick Begich. This is InfoWars. Check out the InfoWars store. That's how this program stays on the air, and we keep people informed. Go to the Info store, purchase items there. You get a 2-for-1, and that is what we need right now.
The scientists at InfoWars Life have created a powerful formula for inflammatory support and joint support. Discover the power of ancient medicine with Bodies. Bodies contains one of the most potent forms of turmeric available. Turmeric has been used for thousands of years and is one of the most studied herbals today. It is well known in traditional medicine for its soothing properties. Our pure turmeric extract plus piperine from black pepper makes for optimal absorption to help boost and support your flexibility, mobility, joint function, immune system, and so much more. Regular turmeric root from the store only contains 1 to 5% of active ingredients, but our turmeric root extract contains over 95% of the active ingredients. Bodies combines turmeric with organic herbs such as spearmint, sage, lemon balm, and thyme to work synergistically for full body support. Try Bodies today at InfoWarsLife.com or call us at 188-253-3139.